from the Reakeeta, Smallwood. And the topic is holding space for tricking the trickster, regional, relational accountability and Aboriginal ethics in community officers. And Dr. Smallwood is a leading Aboriginal researcher whose work focuses on ethical frameworks and relational accountability in Indigenous culture research. She's known for her community-led methodologies and advocacy for culturally safe research practices. So thanks very much, Reakeeta.
I tend to talk a lot, but you guys can hear me. I tend to talk a lot, that's why they pay some. I've got 40 minutes, but you're going to give me a time if that's okay?
No.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Exactly.
So, Reakeeta, thank you so much for having me here. Beautiful orange. I was prepared for this weather. Yes, I can. You can tell I'm prepared. I just want to firstly put out there that I will have images of people that are no longer here. They're in the training. And I may talk about them as well, but I do have permission to do this. They do have permission to share these stories. We begin at this place that grounds me into the Gamilaroi Nation. This place is called Gamilaroi Rock. Located on the second hill of Moore Creek Mountain, 40 minutes or so from Moonbeam. A place of my mother's country and the family who lived there for generations. This place became my tethering to country, which encapsulates my thinking, my experiences, and the stories of our future ancestors. So I take the time right now to acknowledge country and all that encompasses. We further pay respects to elders past, present, and future. I further extend this respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today, and I acknowledge the many diverse nations and places across this great land called Australia, and acknowledge our connection to this land, water, sea, sky, and our sovereignty. Junimar calls. Junimar calls. Can you hear? Can you listen? Junimar calls. Can you hear? Can you listen? Junimar calls it's time to return to her sacred ground and dance upon her secret. Sorry, I messed up. Place. Junimar calls. Can you hear? Can you listen? My connections to family and country and community are located proudly in Trinidad, if you know Trinity, 45 minutes or so, located about 40 minutes to south down to Spontemlo. The great-great-grandfather has a place or a story about this dead tree of the hills, a story, a namesake story. And there's these stories around this idea of this sacredness, a place of gathering, a place of ceremony, obligation to country for our people. The stories of this place, though, have been long since being told, yet our connection to our Junimar, our Mother Earth, continues. And we will wait, and she waits for these stories to turn. She waits for the ceremonies to turn. Importantly, as an Aboriginal person today, I do not speak on behalf of all Aboriginal people. I speak on behalf of my story, my understanding. But also, to be Aboriginal is to be relational. Our experience and our expressions and our identities are inherently connected to relationships and connections. What makes me an Aboriginal person is not you telling me that, but it's through my relationships and obligations through which I then understand I'm Aboriginal. And this is often when we say, where are you from? Where's your mom? Who are you? Where are you from? What's your family? Where are you going? And that's how we have those connection points to figure out where we are located, connected to, and that's part of our integral identity. Now I want to talk a little bit about place, and I love that you in your strategic agenda you've got place-based understandings, because often in ruralisation, rural communities, we have this narrative that also gets assumed in Aboriginality. It is this idea of people, what's going on? What happened? Anyway, so place for us is both a sign of trauma and a sign of healing. Dead tree on the hill in Trinidad is both a sign of healing and also trauma. And understanding place and thinking about country and how then we move through place. It's not that I am human because I am human. Instead, personhood or being connected to country is something that we do not have. It's not something that you have. Instead, it's continually shaped through how you live in relationships to country and others. Or how you treat countries, how you treat others. This idea of that symbiosis, the forming around your personhood and what that means to you. Right there, stop Evan, recording, sorry. So really going back to Ida Mary Graham's quote there, we are all kind of dreaming and country will always remain our greatest teacher with a life down his cycle of life. Sorry. Elder, I see you. I see you working hard. I do. I see you. Elder, I see you. Across time, you weave our people to their cultures. You hold them tight. Elder, I see you. You share love and respect. Elder, I see you. You give your time. You give your energy. You give it all. Elder, I see you. Your feet are firmly planted upon the sacred ground. Elder, I see you. You heal our young ones. You cuddle the young and believe for our future. Elder, I see you. You heal our trauma, hold our stories, and give us hope. Okay. Elder, I see you. What can I grip at? What can I repay? Elder, I see you. As I've been coming to understand and position myself during post-PhD life, there's this story about, interesting, my study was informed with this idea on how do we get over historical trauma as a result of colonisation. And I kept having this story about the trickster coming up in my notes. And most importantly, this concept that Weiser talks about, which is survivance, to have survived and also to resist. So that continuing present seems. And I returned back to my grandfather's stories, my great-grandfather's and grandfather's stories, all located in this reside. And there's many trickster stories, many stories. I don't want to share any stories actually. I don't know exactly which ones to talk at. I can feel this trickster spirit in relationship to my role here in Aboriginal health research is to be a trickster. But I don't think I can be it because it's an archetype that's a doing process. So I think that I've got trickster stories that, yes, we're driving oil one day, and this kind of lays into the identity politics of survivance, which is post-Indian, which Weiser talked about. What does it mean to be Aboriginal beyond the classifications of colonialised views of Aboriginality? Am I holy here? It's busy to a program, SCRSL, yeah, he's like, yeah. And when we let the black colours in there after the war, it was terrible. Is that you, Pop? Did you ever get to do it? No, I was black. Many other trickster stories. But I really wanted to just position him as my trickster, as my essence of my identity. And you can read more about my identity work, more about my PhD, but our identities are expressed and experienced. And where is your identity from? It can come with both the tension of disconnection, but also connection. If you're worried about your identity, who is your mom, where you're from, you're going to go, I don't know where my mom's from. You know what I mean? Like, it can become a place of disconnection for us. But I really wanted to sort of talk about the tricking and the trickster today. And this is the quote I started with in Joanne Archibald's book, which she quotes Weiser. It's both a comic world surviving by his wits, prevailing in good humour. His collective hardly ever in isolation. But when he's in isolation, he's almost always in trouble, in a life-threatening situation. He has to get out through rituals or symbolic acts. Through reversal, he has to get back to connections, to imagination, to people, and to place. And this idea of coming back to this survivance, the idea is also this idea of story. Story has always worked out the participants. So you guys had to be listening to the story to order to understand the story. And through that process, it's telling of the story about a trickster. So I really wanted to sort of talk about this idea of Archibald going on to this idea of trickster being not so much a worse thing, well, we can't actually be it, but there's this doing process. that I'm sort of informed by this idea of two quotes. Beautiful, lies of this quote here: the trickster has never been written about as evil. So quickly, we think about tricksters, we think about the main archetypes like Loki or the, I don't know, what are the big main ones in us, you know, to sort of westernised stories. Never taking advantage of weakness, and also is imagined as compassionate and competent. But also this last quote there by Bayer Ackerman, a Boston man, post-activist, poet, philosopher. He said, how he responds to crisis sometimes is a crisis. Sometimes victory is ironic, and how we frame malice. So holding on to those two notions of trickster and this idea of how we frame, today really is about the tricking story, a cautionary tale around stories and lessons for researchers within Aboriginal health and wellbeing research. Informed from my lens, my Gamilaroi lens, I often say I'm a magpie, black, white, and not black, right? I like that one. But that also plays into the tension. Anyway, it's a long story. But the trickster, anyway, teaches us around resistance through playing, shifting forms, teasing and making us, not teasing assumptions, unpacking the why of the how opposed to the what. But also informed from this idea of Indigenous story works, you know, showing respect and relevance, showing benefit, and also the idea of, I'm going to leave you with a good message. You're not going to go away and go, Aboriginal health's too overwhelming, I'm out of here. You know, closed off in a corner, not worrying, don't want to do it. But also thinking about relational accountability is informed by Martin and Auntie Mary Graham. No one owns knowledge, but it belongs to the relationship. And that's the challenging thing about research. We start to own something. It's our project. We have our grants. We have our papers. This ownership of knowledge. And this space is a very precarious space in Aboriginal health and wellbeing research. Not only are we the most researched population-wise, but also our knowledges and our stories have been taken in and placed in different knowledge systems where then they're valued or devalued, decontextualized. And again, stories about maintaining balance and that relational accountability, and that every story must leave with both good and bad. And then thinking about ethics, so it's around place, identity, social structures, not abstract principles, but this idea of situational ethics. Just because my ethics form says this does not mean I might need to adapt it here to get it to the right point. And so therefore our ethics are embedded in the everyday through our actions of reciprocity, but not merely, we're going to go and make sure we go and talk to that community. And no, actually, we want to actually position this and go, how do we actually tell this story with you? So you can read this. I can't go into Bayo's beautiful work. This podcast here, mind-blowing for me in relation to the trickster stories, if you're interested. Also great podcast to put on in the bath or take it home in the car. But using this metaphor of what happens when we live in the cracks, when we refuse to the polished narratives of progress, when we allow ourselves to be unsettled. That's what the trickster helps us through. So my grandfather is going to help us through today, and also Weissner. But when I first started about Aboriginal health, we think, oh, look at these countries, look at these nations. And students in class go, well, what do you do with Aboriginal people when they come into the room? Or do you not look them in the eye? You know, for example, a nursing student comes up. And I say, hold on, go back to that map at the very start of semester and put that map in the front of your mind. And they go, why, Reakeeta, why? I said, well, I don't know what they want up in Broome or Burke or what. I'm not an expert here. And I break it down into the 3 C's. So it's context, which you guys know, context is so important in our rural health space, rural research spaces. Context is everything. You know, most of our populations live in urban centres, but why is rural health and Aboriginal health so intertwined? Communities. So it's not one Aboriginal community out there, guys. It's communities. We can have social communities, political communities, but also place-based communities. The orange mob communities probably got one mob and they've got all their family mobs.
And then there's a political mob who's involved in health, who's involved in education, and then country as well. Our country, our dreaming, our messages, our creative stories, our songlines, all the connections to place and country. So when I ask a question simply, what do I do for an Aboriginal person in a healthcare centre? I go, well, what would you want to do? We can't make assumptions to think about that. So there's a number of tensions to hold, and I'm going to weave through these tensions in relation to telling stories good ways. So we're concerned, are we? And often in my space, you'll get up a paper and it goes, Aboriginal people compared to non-Aboriginal people are blood. Yeah, we see this a lot. And actually, this idea of deficit, seeing our communities as broken, is actually transforming into us seeing ourselves as broken. You know, we're becoming part of these narratives. You know, I only could see my Aboriginality through deficit for so many years. For so many years, I had positioned myself as broken, nothing, disconnected, didn't know my totems, didn't know my country. I've known it all along, but through these powerful stories of deficit shape the ways in which we interact. And so Mick Dobson, beautiful quote there, since the first intrusive gaze, colonising cultures have always had this preoccupation with observing, analysing, studying, classifying and labelling us. Under this gaze of Aboriginality changed from a daily practice to a problem to be solved. You know, Arnie Rosalie Monks on Question and Answer famously said, I am not the problem. I have never left my country. Yeah, have you seen that? I am not the problem. And these two pieces of work from Lowitja are really good partner pieces that you could actually Google and research yourself around the subtlety of how do we write stories that an Aboriginal person's going to read. If you're doing Aboriginal health research, are they actually going to be happy with the way you've wrote your research up about them? Is that going to sit well? You know, I talk about youth, mental health and well-being. I also sit in that space of the yucky stuff. I won't even say the word. When life has no hope. No hope. When your only way out is your choice. How do you write that in a way that makes sure that the person reading your story holds that hope, or holds the what if, but not just the demise, not just the destruction, disconnection, but yeah. And so Bayo here again helped me again. Here lies the paradox. The way we solve our problems today isn't to provide solutions, because again, they perpetuate the same logic. But we have to engage in a different problem altogether, a new paradigm. And this imperative is not to ask questions not to ask the hard questions opposed to the convenient ones, but it's to ask the different questions which disrupt the lineality of the former. So then it's imperative to not tell the same story with a new accent or enhanced vocabulary, but then tell a different story, a new imperative to tell a new story in a different subtext, new assumptions, plot and pace. Pardon me, I didn't get any water. Went up to something. Thank you. So I'm going to talk to the tensions and the complexities here, both written and also left out. I'm not going to be able to, you might challenge everything I say today, and that's okay. But what I want you to know is there's some things I'm unknowing and knowing at the moment, and I'm still unlearning and learning. But also, I want to consider the multiple viewpoints, the different ways of thinking about it. But most importantly, I want to leave you in this notion of euanoia, which is a Greek concept, to tell a good story and to leave it well with you. So in all of that, consider what I've said and think about where you would reflect, challenge, share, or open your eyes or to think, Reakeeta didn't know what she was going on there, or that kind of thing. So if understanding is knowing in that temporal emergent place-based understandings. Thank you, Tim. So thinking about relational accountability, the collective, Auntie Mary Graham also talks about this idea of dreaming is combined, combination of meaning about life and all reality, and it's the action guide to living. So these two foundational relationships within Aboriginal ontologies, epistemologies, ways of knowing, ways of doing, you know, all those big fancy words. There's two relationships must maintain first within an Aboriginal ethic. And you can Google Auntie Mary Graham's YouTube. Oh, it's just like velvet words of pure bliss. Anyway, and she talks about the first between country and people and the second between people themselves. And the second is always contingent on the first. So that's all meaning comes from country. And to live out, and all that individuality, as a person is found within that collective. So to live outside of that collective is to be a conscious isolate. Or what Auntie Mary Graham talks about is to limit yourself to being an observer in an observed world. And this is the stuff of how do I maintain my collective stuff in my research when it starts to pull me and take me away from what I originally intended. And that when we start moving out of that collective space, we become then observed. Thank you so much. So thinking about then, what does it mean to be a trickster and where can we be tricked in our ways and our approaches in Aboriginal health research? There's many tensions. There's many tensions not only within our universities, but also our Aboriginal community organisation space. You know, how many times has an Aboriginal AMS CEO had an email from a health researcher saying, can I come on, can you support me with my project? Can you support me with our project? And you had all these complexities. But this quote got me through back in 2018 to my quote, my auntie back there. She wouldn't let me like her calling her an auntie, but she said, as Aboriginal people in our community, you learn protocols and obligations from being connected with community. Knowing and implementing these protocols and obligations is the doing part of the process. And so thinking about this idea of this long view and that custodial ethic, and thinking about where are we positioned in relation to our research, I actually realised it was not only an internal governance I had to embed in myself, but also that external part of it as well. But that shifting between the internal and the external was holding that space to keep it in the right place. And so this story of, people coming as part of your research projects and being part of your things and getting it moving, I went into the space thinking that that was my right to have those relationships. It was my right that people turned up to my advisory groups. It was my right that they come and done my yarning and my consent forms. But it's not a right. It's a privilege. That has to be held on the forefront of your mind that this is a privileged space to work in. But also I had to be critically conscious. And I was informed by Lenore Guy's work on critical Murray consciousness, which is both the complex yet the uncomplicated. And it's just to describe things, instead of describing Western ways of thinking, she actually said it's not really about the head and all the big words we can say, but really the heart. And this idea of the word heart is both the symbiosis between our mind and our emotions, our senses and our spirits. And then how we move through that temporality through place, space and time. So now we've kind of got this big theoretical dump on you. I'm going to take you through the tricky stories. But I wanted to sort of name the tensions a little bit. Yeah. So this is what Bond and Singh and Tyson wrote a few years back ago. But this quote again, we go to the NHMRC 6 core principles, right? And they say there's no mention of whilst the apparent universal Indigenous culture is attached to the 6 core principles of what NHMRC says, yep, great ethical research there. There's no mention of our 500 nations. There's no mention of our different diversities, clan groups, family groups, connections to songline stories, places. These principles, despite being excessively adorned with culture, untethers us from our black bodies, our families, our communities, and the cultural context in which we come from. So they can be left in our supposed hands of us great health researchers. So again, we can get tricked into thinking that we're using the right things, the right principles, but again, where are we taking the context from the lovely bodies? 15 years ago, this conversation was started, and I can say this, the conversation probably hasn't changed today. Bainbridge and her group there, although there's a large volume of health research has been conducted with us, it actually has made no commensurate improvements in relation to our health outcomes. Research benefit and research impact need distinct, ethically grounded definitions, particularly within our context of communities. It must incorporate our values, our priorities, and not just the traditional metrics. Yep, right reference group, yep. But to improve benefit and to make our research work, there has to be a new framing from which we would then embed Aboriginal-led benefit approaches to the project from the start all the way down to the end to ensure it's actually valued by your communities that are participating. And just recently, there's been a new, the Witcher co-design, Fox co, co-design in Aboriginal health research now. If I read someone's paper or their research project, co-design's like my trauma, my trigger word now. What? Co-design? Oh, come on, tell me about your co-design process. Come on. I've just put this up here. I will send my PDFs out if you want them. But really, the underpinning layers are leadership. Who's leading your projects? Is it Aboriginal people leading your projects? Where'd you get your idea from? What was your intent? Was it your idea first? Where is the power located? Where does it situate? Is it situated within the university hierarchies, or is there actually power led by the communities in which the research is for and with? Where are the outcomes? Does the lovely PHN with their beautiful, what's it called, with all the beautiful metric data all presented, but they might just want a story, managing those conflicts. And then where are the underpinning of Indigenous data sovereignty? Can we access this data? Can we reuse this data? Can this data be changed from the story that we want it to tell opposed to the story it's telling? How are we using stats to tell a good story? Don't just present me stats that make me feel like I'm a deficit or demised or broken. How are we presenting data? Then also, where is the process? Is it open? Is it flexible? Or is it built on this rigidity? Or is it built on this blurriness of, we know what's going on. There's an opaque layer of opposed co-design. So there's a few other things there. But the main point here that they sort of talk about in their main sort of findings here is, again, reflections of ourselves internally, but also externally. How are we moving through this internally? And without critical reflection, the integrity of the co-design process is undermined. Without us always being cognizant and conscious of the ways in which we work and move through spaces, we can potentially place power or impose power on others. So now I'm going to move into my tricky stories. So if you use the same tools, you always have the same outcomes. Or if you look through the same lens, you'll always see the same picture. Again, this is the tricky story of, we might say that's a 6 on the ground, but the other people are saying, nah, it's a 9. And this idea of the rigidity of our process, we want to solve this problem for Aboriginal people, opposed to, we understand there's a problem. How are we going to do this together? Opposed to, we've got the tools, we've got the science, we've got the universities, we've got the cars, we've got the payroll. And often when we situate ourselves in this tricky story, we're hiding behind our methods. No, we've got to get our approvals, we've got to be objective, we've got to situate ourselves within ethics boards, institution boards, and often the research method is situated as a priority, or the protection of our empirical analytical knowledges are emphasised. And then often you'll see the deficit discourse come out, because objective ways of knowing, being and doing are privileged in Aboriginal health or in health research, And this idea that perpetuates our deficit through the objective ways of knowing, the raw stats and data says, I know what story it paints. So often when you think about that, how do we actually contextualize our approaches? And often the tricky story is we situate within this decontextualized rational rigidity, scalability and flexibility, objectivity. Am I okay for time?
That's fine.
Yep. It often could be harmful in science, people and stories. And ultimately, without that meaningful listening and engagement, reflexive methods and cultural leadership, we vote with our feet. And then often the story is, no one would turn up to our yarning sessions. No one would turn up to our community engagement events. But often it's because we've got these parts wrong in the first start part wrong. So really, what armour are we wearing when we enter into the Aboriginal health research space? If I say Aboriginal health research is a glass shop, so fragile, you're going to have to move around it so you don't hurt it. But often within these empirical analytical Western training of research, we come in with our armour, our big pieces of armour, spiky armour, and it's not fit for the place in which Aboriginal health research is. It's precarious, fragile. You want to make sure you look after the relationships and not be subsumed by the system. So really thinking about what type of armour do I want to wear into the glass shop? Am I reflective of what type of armour I'm wearing? I'm going to go in, I'm a methods expert on random control tiles. I've got all my protocols set. We're going to have it phased out this way, this way, this way. We come in with these big pieces of armour and we expect to make research happen in a fragile glass shop. And so this is really the tricky story too. It's not how we go about it, opposed to what we aim to do. And we often get trapped into thinking, or we have these distractions and shiny lights that go, oh, your project's going so well. Look at all the media, look at all the papers you're writing. I remember this one time I was working on a project and it took a lot of effort to fix it. And because it had a lot of challenges. The national program's #1 KPI was, how do we reduce discharge against medical advice? Can you see the deficit story there? That was their #1 success factor for their project, an Aboriginal national funded project. Their main KPI was, how do we get Aboriginal people from leaving the hospital? Long story short, we'd done this big celebration, a big event. We're all, Reakeeta, you're doing so well. Oh, look at you having a big morning tea, big opening. We renamed the project. We had all the shiny lights of an Aboriginal-led project, right? And I was tricked because my friend come into me as we were having our big celebration, just from around the medical ward. She comes screaming in. What are you doing? Not getting up me, but she said, Reakeeta, this man over there, this Aboriginal man, a key project person that we had involved in a previous project, was in his bed, not cared for nurses very well. He wasn't cared for. He was dishevelled, left in bed, in a complete mess. No one had come near him for hours. The family had found him like that. You can imagine sort of what the state might have been. Unfortunate story. I was tricked into thinking I was doing so well in my projects that I actually forgot about this story. We can get so quickly taken up into thinking of matter of importance. I've done it so much in my career. Oh, look how important you are, Reakeeta. Look at you go, look at you go. And you have these moments that bring you back to the humility of what you're trying to do. And where we're, the irony of the system thinking that we're doing something important, but actually we're missing the mark here. So really, to stay focused on principles of relationality, authentic power sharing, and ongoing critical reflective practice, we have to look for the trickster in ourselves, the new ways of doing and knowing, and not being caught up in the doing that feeds tricking ourselves into research impact, opposed to actually finding trickster ways to actually say, how do we benefit? How does this project actually add to the benefit that we need to make happen? How do we actually situate it within that benefit-led approach? But it's not something we can take for granted. Again, to be relational, to practice within that custodial ethic are not qualities simply we're born with. We're not born with this, but instead are cultivated through relationship, connection, action, and reflection. So time, place, silence, and ongoing connections are always needed through all ups and downs, working our way through communities.
Peter, 5 minutes.
5 minutes, good, I'm almost finished. So tricky story number 3, it has to situate within this idea of cultural safety. And I mean cultural safety, capital C, capital S. Ramsden's theory and practice model, if you haven't engaged with Dr. Irapati Ramsden's work on cultural safety, but it has ongoing critical reflection, cultural humility, willingness to learn and unlearn, being open, honest and humble, reflective, accountable, thinking what armor am I wearing into this space today? What am I bringing all my methods with me? Am I bringing all my biases with me, all my assumptions with me, that I'm the expert here and I know how to solve your diabetes. I know how to solve your problem. And she talks about these powerful examples, always reflecting on power, the very potential. Without even spoken words, we can actually tell someone if we're going to impose our power on them, or if we have the belief and the assumptions that we know the answers. So really, are we looking in the mirror or are we looking through the window of culture? And that's this idea of to know yourself, to know your worldviews, your values, your beliefs, your assumptions is your number one priority in Aboriginal health research. Because if you know what you value and what you hold in your worldview and what you believe, you're going to know that every other person is going to have those values, beliefs, and worldviews. And then when we're trying to impose, we go, oh, actually, that's going to impose on my belief and our value. Hold on, I need to sit here and actually look in the mirror again. So a couple of tricksters. So if I'm comfortable making decisions without voice, guidance, and relationship, are you comfortable? Always be uncomfortable. Forever conscious of what armor, again, beliefs, values, assumptions you're wearing when you're coming into this space to make sure that the benefit's led by community. It's about holding integrity of the research methods and approvals opposed to relationships. Relationships and relations are precarious and fraught with fragility. Colonial power, interdivision, and long history of tokenism, no benefit and deficit-based. We must remain obligated and accountable to relations, and we have to find new ways to step outside of our paradigms that we're so indoctrinated in, to work for new ways. I don't have time to engage, but I can get approval and make it happen quick. If you do not have time to engage deeply, to listen deeply, hear, know, remember, or Winningali would say back home, you cannot do meaningful research. It cannot be Aboriginal-led. It has to come from that wellbeing and context and communities, and time is the most crucial thing you'll ever have in this space. I've been trained on how to conduct a yarning interview. It's a semi-structured interview, right? Knowing, being, doing, becoming is always contingent on the ways in which we work through our ways of doing in relationship to self and others and the world around us. It's not realistic to use Western-informed understandings and methods without that proper leadership, engagement, and reflection. So, are we being systematically curious towards a new knowledge in health research, or situationally curious in our ways of doing in research that benefits communities in which we live, learn, and work? Should I do one more poem and then I'm done? Yeah? Just, this is my final poem I done for my thesis. Thank you for having me today. I keep having this yarn with this version of myself who started this story long ago. I wonder about the yarn the two of us would have and the insights I would bring to the young woman I'm sure I would no longer recognise today. I would hold her hand and tell her to tread lightly and take her time. Find time to be and space for silence. I would then hug her and tell her to let the movement of emotion move through her, to flow the current with the current and not let it consume her. Feel it all around you, let it be, I would whisper. That once she was through the storm, I would hug her again and tell her, tread lightly and find space for silence. That when grief comes knocking, find hope, I would say, reminding her to look for love and forgiveness for herself and others. To not be afraid and that the grief would become her teacher, to tread lightly and find space for silence.